In this test, we will collectively disassemble each gun, assessing on a 5-point scale the ease with which they can be serviced.
All right, gang, we are indoors, and actually, I need to swap my hat. Brownells has been very kind to help us with this, but for right now, we are at C&S, Charlie and Sierra, over in Charleston, South Carolina, and stop on by and say thanks for helping us out here because we have indoor lighting, and it's the middle of the frickin' night.
Yep.
And we're still at work. Is anybody getting sleep on this project?
Nope.
Not yet.
Okay.
Someday.
So we have to assess these things for field strip. So, Ian, what do we decide on how far to take these down?
We want to take the bolt out. That's the most important single element of maintaining one of these guns in the field. Pull the bolt, clean the bolt. So that's our standard.
Yeah. There's other things, depending on the system, gas, whatever, recoil. They need their own things, maybe change asbestos seals for a water jacket. But in terms of rapid service, we're going to go with the bolt because not all of them have pullable barrels. Not all of them have serviceable other bits and bobs. So we're each going to take 2 each. And we are doing this exhausted and roughly from memory. So this should be a lot of fun.
This is sort of like
slightly muddy.
Yeah, like sort of field conditions.
So, yeah. I guess.
So we are then also going to basically assess each of these guns on a 1 to 5 scale of how easy and effective they are to disassemble. And this will go into our overall assessment of the guns across all categories of shooting, moving, maintaining, etc.
Okay, let's get into it. All right, I'm first up, and I get to play with the Hotchkiss portative. Now, we've already dropped the bolt, just because we were messing with it a moment ago. So that's already forward, so that would be sort of your first step. Make sure it's clear. I feel like I think it's pretty well covered. And then, for a lot of this, we're just going to play B-roll, because it's late. We're trying to get this wrapped up. So, on this particular gun, it's not as complicated as you would think, because realistically, I have to turn a knob on this side of the gun, rotate that guy around and around and around. Don't lose him, he's not captive. And then from there, I can go ahead and switch up to disassembly position. And these can be done in either order. You actually don't have to you don't have to loosen the thing first. You don't have to disassemble the charging handle first either. But once I'm partially out, I just got to rotate over to the right. You'll find that sweet spot where she'll just slide on out. Charging handle is out and down. From there, all I have to do is grab the handle, push forward a bit, and you can see she drops out. Careful, there's a spring under tension in there. And we'll slip forward. We're clear. We're clear. So, from here, it's really just about getting a hold of what is the gas piston. You can't see it in there yet.
So you're effectively fishing for it in the dark.
Right. And this all seems sensible so far, which is probably the most sensible thing about this gun in the entire testing that we've done.
Yeah.
But you just can't always...
There's no real way else to get it.
So I can keep doing that with my hand. The other thing I found, and this is not necessarily recommended in the manuals, but the other thing I found is that I can actually get this guy in here, turn him a bit, and I can fish it, and it's a lot easier, but it's not a positive grip. It might slip off. You might end up kind of bapping yourself with it if you're not paying attention, but that works just fine for me. So I'm going to pull this guy out. Careful not to lose the bolt because now we have our gas piston, our bolt, and our firing pin is floating in there. So overall, not too bad,
It's
right?
actually not too bad.
No, it was fairly quick too, I would say. You don't have a lot of parts that are separate from each other too. It's a lot of big chunks.
Yeah, now I will say oh, I'm sorry.
I don't like the fishing
No.
for this.
No.
Everything else is pretty straightforward and easy to do. That's a little tricky. That kind of takes it down a notch in my view.
Yeah, I also think the fishing in terms of a battlefield, especially if this starts to choke, I found the first time I went into this gun when it was dirtier, was very difficult to sort of get it out. And then there's a lot of fine motor movements in this and a very good chance of losing a very small critical part.
True.
So not my favorite. And there's other things that have to come apart in terms of cleaning and maintenance that we're just going for the bolt right now, but to get those apart, it's kind of wacky. You got to turn stuff upside down, or flip it around, you got to lift up the sight. So it gets more complicated, although it does have a fairly easy, quick change barrel in a sense. You just turn a wrench and you're off and on your way. But overall, not the worst thing we've ever seen.
No, it's certainly not.
Not the worst, but certainly not the best either.
No.
Right. So in terms of assembly, I am not going to define it. We will just speed this footage on up.
Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While you've a Lucifer to light your bag, smile, boys, that's the style.
All right, so we're reassembled, and a couple things to note. If the locking lugs get turned out for any reason while it's disassembled, you have to realign them just right. You have to lift up this plate just right. You have to, I mean, you saw there's a tab that is the guide for the firing pin lockout that you have to align as you feed it in there. There's a number of things on reinsertion that must be lined up, like at least 3 critical points that have to sort of, turn, and then we whoop, and you finally got it. So in terms of reassembly, I actually find it to be much worse on reassembly. However, I do say, I'm amazed that they gave me this sort of yoke down here, like these 2 finger prongs forward, because that allows me to more easily align what would be a difficult spring once you get the hang of sort of doing a reverse S, which I didn't quite do at first. I let it sort of turn into a U, or an N in this case. So overall, fairly good. You guys saw me do it. Where do you think the ranking is on this one?
If I were to include both like a disassemble and reassemble together, I'd probably rank it a 3 out of 5. But if I were to split them up, I'd probably give it the disassembly 4 out of 5 and then the reassembly the 3 out of 5. So it's kind of middle ground.
I was thinking right in the middle of the 3.
Yeah.
3, maybe 4. I agree with you. It's kind of interesting. Reassembly is what knocks it down. Mm-hmm. So, all right, I think we need to go over and get the next one, right?
Sounds
All right,
good to me.
yeah. All right, the next one up is the Chauchat. We have 2 of these, of course, one in 8mm, one in 30-06. However, they are, from a disassembly and reassembly perspective, identical. So we are going to do the American 30-06 Chauchat, recognizable, of course, by its big square magazine well. And we kind of have to take this whole thing apart in order to get the bolt out, unfortunately. We're going to start at the back end, where you unthread this rear receiver plug. There is a little spring-loaded tab right here, and that just locks the plug in place so that it can't rotate when you don't want it to. So we'll unscrew this. Once we get it all the way unscrewed,
I was once given a can of peanuts. There were not peanuts in there. There were like springy snakes.
Yes, and that's what we're going to get with this. Once it's unthreaded all the way, it's going to do that.
I peed a little.
That was actually startling.
All right, that gets the spring tension off the bolt. Now what we need to do is remove the upper tube from the lower assembly of the receiver. We have a lever up here at the front, and we have a pin in the back. This pin is actually kind of clever in that it's got a spring-loaded washer in it, and it's got a little rotating, kind of like a T-head to it.
A cross key of some sort.
Yeah, so when it's assembled, you push it all the way in, and then you can rotate the locking cross piece over. When you want to take it out, you push on it, unrotate the cross piece, and then we can push this down into the bottom. It is captive, won't come out. The top assembly here has just a 90-degree lever that we're going to pull down.
This kind of feels like some of those Chinese puzzle boxes where you got to do like 6 different things in 6 different ways in order to get it apart.
And then,
fair. Now the French ones weren't captive at the rear, were they?
Yes.
Oh, they were?
Yep. These are identical in disassembly.
Oh, heck.
And there we go. Now we have the receiver tube out, and we can put this guy away. If you do this, you do have to be very careful in that the edges here are really sharp, and this can easily cut you up. So,
You're not kidding.
Nope.
Now, was that used for any sort of alternative kitchen utensil or anything in the field? You know,
Awfully greasy, probably not.
I hear lead's not good for you anyway.
The French took their cooking very seriously, and I suspect they took their cooking utensils rather seriously. Once we have this tube off, we can take off the charging handle, and then we can pull out the bolt. So,
I feel like we've been shooting that.
yes, it's oily and disgusting. So, that's the disassembly procedure.
Okay.
Reassembly is a little bit finicky. So, this part's kind of easy. What we have here that you need to keep track of is a flat side with a hole in the bottom of the bolt carrier there is a matching round plug on the bolt handle. So this is going to go in back here, and what we need to do is make sure that, oh, and at this point the whole barrel assembly will come out if you want it to, which we don't. We want this to go back up. Line that up. It is trying to go into the nose there, I believe.
We don't want to take it out.
There we go. Yeah, you don't want to take it out if you don't have to. Now, bolt carrier goes in. This has, I should point out here, this has a pin that will retract down when the bolt is in the proper orientation.
Okay. So, in other words, you can't insert without the lugs in the correct position.
Exactly. If the lugs are in the wrong position, that pin pops up and it will not go into the receiver tube. So, the trick though is it's kind of easy to rotate it out of position. So you have to like just hold it in the right orientation while you.
Do you need me to hold while you push?
I think I'm good at the moment. Let's put that in there.
I see the pin.
Yep.
Yep, you do.
Now the pin it prevents you from being able to insert it, but here's the wondrous thing. It doesn't actually show up where you can see it consistently enough to actually help indicate correctness. It just indicates wrongness.
Correct. It is a tactile indication that you ain't done it right. Almost. Come on. Now I've done it again. I'm not giving this thing a good name, am I?
No,
I mean, you gotta agree that this is kind of a bit.
All right, you know what?
This isn't really a very intuitive takedown, let alone reassembly.
We're going to do it this way. We're going to put this in
I like this strategy
into the
better.
barrel and then put the barrel forward. That's probably the better way to do it. That's, in fact,
I feel like this was a
definitely the
strategy
better way
issue.
to do it. Then,
I feel like what?
There's a strategy issue. It's doing a little bit better now. Although I see the...
nope, I messed it up again here. Now, there we go. Now we need to line this round hole up so that we can put our bolt handle on.
I want to say this does not feel like something you could do in very poor light.
No.
I'm sure it's easier when you're getting shelled. No. Unfortunately, we haven't gotten to the specific tricky bit that...
This is not the tricky
There
bit.
we go. Okay, so that's nicely in line now. Now, the tricky bit is lining up this handle with this plate. There's a little camming. The feed ramp in the Chauchat actually is articulated. And as the bolt cycles back and forth, the feed ramp moves up or down. And it's controlled by the cam track in this right here. So we need to have this in the correct position right there. And then what you have to do is line up the rear plug, the front thing, and the bolt handle extension here all at the same time. I want this to come back like that. Sit in there. Put that up there.
So what I'm seeing is the challenge is that it's not sequential so much as simultaneous.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You know, it is possible that there is a trick to this.
I mean, that looks pretty smooth.
There. Oh, yeah. All right. So, it's possible that I just executed the trick to this.
I was going to say, it seems like the front
That spring
point
is really tight.
has some more yoke to it.
All right.
Or has some more, not yoke, but leeway to it, I should say.
A little bit. All right, and then
I have your blender.
back in there. Now, with all this put in, we can just reinsert the recoil spring. It is nice that
How much pressure are you putting on this?
this takes a decent bit. The bolt is forward. This is really hard to do if you don't have the bolt forward.
Then I imagine it's under a bit of pressure.
Yeah. So we're going to hold this little lever down again so we can screw it back in. They do have knurling on the back here, so you can actually get a grip on this plug. And
It's the one thing they make easier.
piece of cake.
You know, it's funny. It took a while, but realistically, once you backed the barrel out and started aligning it that way, it went
That helped.
a fair bit fast. Like, I feel like we've over-exaggerated the worst of it, although, again...
Would you necessarily think to do that, though? Was that intuitive?
What I noticed is you have a slot in the receiver, you have a slot in the barrel assembly, you then have the lugs to align, and the lugs rotate on a bolt body, I guess, in this case. What would you call that rear part
Bolt
of the
sleeve?
Bolt carrier.
bolt carrier. And so those have to then be in alignment. So it's align, align, align. And then when you go to reassemble it, it's align, align, align. And so there's a lot of this gun that's like, all you have to do is simultaneously hold these 3 or 4 things into one position. And that just feels like, I think if there's more time thought to the actual field use in that one regard, they might have come up with a way to sort of dance it in a little bit better.
So I want to reiterate a point here on the hazard to cutting yourself on this gun. Part of the whole story of the Chauchat is that this is an industrial produced, mass produced. There were more of these than any other automatic weapon in World War I. The 8mm ones, not the 30-06 ones.
Right.
And part of that is they were making them very quickly. So this is not finely machined parts. A few of them are. But then you've got things like this lower assembly that's made out of a couple pieces of sheet steel that are roughly cut into shape and bolted together. And the edges on this will cut you up. And there are some other parts in here that you just have to be a little bit careful with, in a way that something like the Lewis gun or the Hotchkiss portative, given the incredible number of machine hours that went into making them, don't have like sharp edges and burrs.
Now, the French doctrine, as far as I understand, you know this better than I do, but while we have you here, I know we're going into a bit more detail on this gun. If you weren't supposed to be taking it apart, you weren't supposed to be taking it apart.
I don't think you're supposed to be taking apart any of this
Yeah,
stuff
but
if you
more
didn't
so,
had to.
the history I've heard on these guys, especially because of the way those timing screws work, because those are not disassembly screws up there, those are timing screws.
Correct.
And Americans, I heard, would get a hold of them and
Tighten
try
down.
to, and then next thing you know, it won't feed.
Yeah.
So maybe know what you're doing if you start taking apart a Chauchat that you happen to find in your attic.
Yeah. The thing that the French typically did is if something was only supposed to be disassembled by an armorer, it had a specialty screw head. The regular screwdriver would not fit in. And you see that on some of these bolt heads or washer heads on the side here. So,
I mean, not these guys, but then again, I guess
Correct.
I expected you
That's
to
an
essentially-
invitation because you're supposed to adjust those in case you have feed problems. But
Makes sense.
this is the equivalent of this is today or World War I squad automatic weapon. Right. So the gunner, as well as the rest of the gun crew, went through a fairly extensive training process. And this is going to be true for all of the guns that we're talking about here, not just the Chauchat.
We're novices. I mean, even with our experience with firearms, these are people that
novices
did this job over and over again.
Right. We are novices to the specific routine and detail of these guns because these guns haven't been operated in this way in 100 years. So the guys who are operating these guns in World War I were experts in every aspect of how do you take it down, how do you clean it, how do you put it back together, what are the tricks. And so just like many pieces of military equipment today, they're not always the easiest or the most intuitive, and the guys doing this stuff are going to curse certain aspects of them, but they're also going to actually be pretty good at it.
So where do you rank it?
2.
You give it a 2?
I can't disagree with the 2. I almost want to put it to a 1, but once you are able to actually put the barrel like in there in such a way where you put it all in there together, it bumped it back up to a 2 for me.
So here's the thing. This is still all doable without any tools.
That is true.
So there are no
Need a
tools.
single tool.
There's nothing. You can't put it back together the wrong way.
Right.
It may be finicky to get back together, but to me, it's a 2 with no chance of going to 1. Like,
yeah, it's got like a participation
I
trait.
can't really put it to 3 because we've looked at other guns that we've rated as 3s. They're better than this.
Right.
but no lower than 2.
Maybe we're too harsh.
All right, well, let's go for our next gun.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm on the Madsen, and this one's actually not too bad.
Yeah.
Again, some things easier than others, but in terms of disassembly for this gun, and again, I got to go off my memory a little bit here, we can pop this cover open and pay close attention to the inside, because on reassembly, just to warn us all ahead of time so everybody can watch me, this spring can be damaged if it's reassembled incorrectly. But we don't need that. There's an inspection plate on this side where we can get in there and see the timing. Also don't need that to get to the bolt. All we really need to get to the bolt is this key here, and it's facing away from me and towards the camera, so I gotta remember lefty-loosey and go around a few times. And again, not captive, so this could be lost, but...
On just a quick side note, it's interesting how they changed this design over the coming decades.
Oh yeah, you've handled the portative.
Yeah, like the late models of this, that key wasn't threaded. It was a 90-degree throw, and it was a captive pin.
You were telling me about that earlier. Yeah, it sounds much nicer in terms
Yeah.
of disassembly for that.
Yeah, you did say there's one other difference, which we'll see in just a second
Yep.
here, which is that if I just break this forward, it just releases from a tongue to the rear.
Yep.
And you were saying...
The later ones are pinned in place, so this drops down like an AR receiver.
Okay. So again, we'll get this guy up and out of our way so that we're not binding anything. And then this is a little awkward without turning it outside, but we're just showing this for the camera. So the whole thing comes to the rear. And that is pretty much...
That is your entire barrel and breech assembly.
Yeah. And we have a fairly complicated trigger group in here that...
We're not going to get into
We're
today.
not taking that apart.
Oh,
but
no.
this is all we need to get in here and sort of service this gun. Now, we haven't quite taken the bolt out because we have this sort of rising and falling breech block. That's in there in a very, very much more complicated way. But now we can clean the action.
Yeah, you don't take the breech block out.
No.
No. You take this whole thing out and you replace it with a new thing. This was actually intended to be field changeable. If you overheated a barrel, pull the whole thing out, put in a new one, and it's pre-head spaced because it comes with its own breech assembly.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little idea. I mean, all you're really doing is this is a skin. You're almost the inversion. You're just dropping the entire interior action, but you don't have to remanufacture all this to have a spare in the field.
Exactly.
And you have time to let that cool down.
Yep.
So we got her apart. Now we got to do this thing where we put it back together, which oftentimes is more complicated.
Which, just looking off of this, it doesn't look like it is going to be complicated, so I'll be curious to see how it goes.
No, where we're at now is pretty much a 5. Like, this is...
This is
I mean,
awesome.
This is great.
Maybe not perfect score, but we are very close to a perfect score.
That's a high 4.
Yeah.
So on assembly, a couple things. Number one, I asked you guys to please watch me on this because it can get damaged permanently. And it's not an easy part to replace if you were to do that in the field. So if you goofed up that order of operation, and this is critical. This is critical to the function of the gun. If you bent that up in the field and it snapped, it's a lot to drift that pin out and put another one in there. This is actually, captive at both ends, and it's not good. So the one thing is make sure that's up, which is why I'm going to lift this up. May's going to give me a hand. And then 2 is a part that I'll probably have to pop you guys a photo of, but it's the unique way the extraction/ejection works on this gun, which is right here. It's actually it's as simple as a finger going like this to flick the cartridge out.
Yeah.
The problem is the way that's activated is there's some lobes in here that press on this lever, which release it to be pressed then to the rear as a flick. So it's controlled so that it doesn't accidentally flick when it's not supposed to. But as we shove this in, that not wanting to bend when it shouldn't means that it will tie up the action as we try to insert it unless we very deliberately actually bop the extractor out of the way. So I have to take this down to upside down land almost.
I think a good analogy to this would be having to have an AR bolt in the specific rotated forward configuration to put the bolt carrier in the gun.
Right.
So if you've got it in the wrong orientation, you just can't reassemble the thing, and that's kind of what's going on here.
Right. And
so
then
it's a little more finicky.
Yeah, it's hard to get sort of thumb pressure on it just right, which I am doing. If I put it on the side that I am on, I start running into, actually I'm pressing the bolt hold open into the action, so I'm probably holding it against myself right now. But once it's hooked, I can get this guy aligned and dropped in as long as I'm on the keyway the correct direction.
And this is the point where if this spring falls in and you're not paying attention to it, and you're busy trying to force the barreled action in, that's where you can really run into trouble with that spring.
Another thing you can mess up, now you can technically assemble it without taking this part off, but I want to show you guys. This is what's determining all that. Ooh, I'll drop it right on the floor and pick it right back up. If I can find it.
Here you go.
There it is. This is what's determining the rise and fall of our breech
It's
block.
like the CPU of the Madsen.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So that's determining what's going on, and the problem is if you don't have it in the right position, you can catch on that as you try to reassemble, and you get a lot of resistance. So if you take it off, you actually have an easier overall reassembly. Again, I'm resting on my bolt lock. So kudos to take it off, and it can speed up putting it back together. Not 100% necessary, but in this case you saw I was bopping up against it. I'm bopping up against the bolt lock because I'm holding this on its side. I can't actually close the lid and flip it upside down because, again, I will snag this spring. Now I'm far enough forward that I can go ahead and do this and get her lined up a little bit better, especially because I'm outside my timing again. So again, another one of those guns where, unfortunately, reassembly requires you to get the pieces in the correct alignment. This is towed to the forward position. Now we can actually put it back together. And when we put it back together, we are not done with finicky things, because as this comes back together, you must hold this cocking handle in the forward position.
Oh, that's super weird.
Yeah, it's got to be right there, because if it's not, when you drop this together, it will not actually be able to cock.
There we go.
So double check we don't have tension on that. And then we can just take our, thank you, pin and walk her on. We're all set. Now, normally we would speed that up, but there's just so many finicky things to this. I think it was worth talking about.
Yeah.
So another finicky assembler.
I'm torn between a 3 and a 4 on that.
You know, it's funny that the assembly is so finicky. I'm torn between a 2 and a 3 at this point, because the assembly, I rate the assembly at a 2. I rate the disassembly at almost a 5. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, that was damn near perfect. You're right.
So I'd say somewhere in 3s. Are we okay with that?
Yeah, I think we're good with 3.
Okay. Well, next gun and next person.
All right.
All right, guys, it is my turn. I'm going to be taking apart the Lewis today. Normally, I don't do these, so this will, I think, technically be my first strip on camera, so let's, I guess, get right into it. First and foremost, we're going to make sure we want to drop the bolt. I'm just going to pull the trigger, pull the bolt back, and just let her down easy. Then there's a small little tab down here. You're just going to depress, like, right in front of the buttstock, twist her, wiggle her out, and she comes free. At that point, we're going to want to get the grip free. We're just going to pull the trigger ever so slightly, and this guy is just going to automatically come loose. You can just unhook her and put her down. And then we're just going to slide out the back. There we go. And you're just depressing the trigger, you know, a little bit to get it free. And then you pull the bolt back, and you just want to pull it back just until you get it back. Like, there's a small little, like, opening or notch in here. You can kind of feel it. And then this actual bolt handle is going to come free. At that point, you can just pull everything back, and there's no real need to pull everything out, because realistically, I'm just after the bolts at this point.
That was pretty quick.
Yeah,
We've got our gas piston and firing pin, which is all one. This is actually interesting, not really to do a takedown, but our piston has the 2 thing to engage the clock style spring and the firing pin all in one component, which is pretty wild.
It's a mechanically awesome system.
Yeah, and then we'll let that down. And then the reason that bolt had to be forward, charged forward rather, is because of this guy, and that's actually how I cut my thumb, which is why I bring it up. This sets all the spring pressure for the system, and there's a tab here. If you ever disassemble this gun, do yourself a favor, it's running right. Don't bump this tab when disassembling, because what you'll do is, you saw May, the minute she popped that loose, this thing hangs down. Sometimes it'll slip off, bounce off the ground, that gets depressed. This wheel unwinds. I was trying to do a controlled unwind and cut myself with it earlier because we wanted to get a little less pressure on the bolt. And so this is how you ratchet up how much spring tension you have on the system, so you can adjust for different types of ammo in addition to the 2-position gas key. So this is pretty cool. Like, you can time the gun pretty quickly by playing with this.
And pretty perfectly for whatever ammo you have.
Yeah, and when we put this back together, same thing. Bolt all the way forward so that you have already engaged. Hold this up for me 1 second. Of course, now I won't be able to fish it out. There we go. you want to make sure that these teeth are interlocked before this tab gets released again on assembly, because it will untime the gun and you have to go in there and mess with it. And so a lot of people that have Lewis guns will have small problems with that because, I'm sorry, I just set you up because I overset that. Pop that out for me. There. I'll leave it right there for you.
Thank you.
So let's talk reassembly, because we've played this game already. It looks real simple to get apart, so this must be a nightmare to get back together, right?
I mean, from what I can tell and from what I'm looking at, it doesn't seem like it's actually going to be that bad, because realistically, I just need to make sure my locking lugs are lined up and I put the firing pin right inside. And as long as the locking lugs are in the correct position, she should all just feed forward. I do have to make sure.
You made the mistake of saying that.
I know, I made the mistake of saying it. There we go. Here we go. She shoves forward, and then basically I just need to get to the point where I can put this, the bolt handle just directly back in there. At that point, I can go ahead and push this all forward. I can put this guy back in here, just basically hinge it, and I can probably put her on back up. I'm going to grab the trigger, line her up. Go. She's nice and seated all the way in, and then at this point it's just a matter of lining up the buttstock and twisting her into place, and boom, she's back together. That's really simple. The disassembly and assembly on this one, I would say, are pretty well equal.
I think we've had some that are maybe slightly simpler to disassemble, but in terms of both balanced disassembly, reassembly, what are you thinking?
For the whole package, this is a nice relief to finally see a good one. I would put this a solid 4.
Yeah, I would agree.
4 to 5 almost. There's a couple finicky bits, but not so bad. Honestly, the only dinger for me is the fact that A, that charging handle is pretty easy to lose, but not terrible. And B, you can really accidentally untime that gun if this falls and lands wrong.
Yeah.
That's a pain that you'd have to reset your spring tension if you just happen to let that go flick, bunk, blorp, and that'd be it. So that's, and by the way, you can control that, so obviously that's not a huge ding, but I do think it takes it off the 5.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but
That's
it's excellent.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that pretty much covers this guy, so why don't we get to our next gun?
Okay.
All right, everyone's favorite World War I automatic rifle, not quite a light machine gun, automatic rifle, John Browning's BAR. So, taking this apart is going to begin with a pair of levers here on the side, which you need a tool to get out. Like, these are little spring tension levers, and we have a cartridge somewhere that I'm not sure now where it went.
And the best tradition, I got my bullet. So I'll give that to you. Although I feel like you are possibly missing the real first step. This is the American BAR. So we must find the nearest flag and salute it before we start any work because of absolute American exceptionalism and everything. Now we saw that this is pretty good on the range. So this is going to be cakewalk, right?
We'll see. All right. So there is a little divot on these. In fact, we'll start with this one.
Maybe try to make it user-friendly.
So it's lift and sweep.
Yep. You can't lift.
You kind of
you can sort of, it's like pry and hope you don't gouge out the gun. Yeah. So
the thing, American disassembly procedure seems to make you want to scratch the gun up. It's like 1911s and BARs and everything. It's just like, okay, you got to get apart without scratching it.
Take this.
Guess we're not shooting that round afterwards.
Come on.
John Moses Browning, best inventor ever of firearms. Never had a troublesome design.
Well, we'll pull that out for the moment. There we go. All right.
I believe in you.
This one is keyed, by the way, so you have to rotate it about 180 degrees and then it'll come out. Not captive, so go ahead and lose those.
We're down to 2 not captives already.
Yep. Now, let's see if I can remember exactly what this whole process is. We're going to start by pulling this forward, and we are going to get rid of the recoil spring here so we can just get tension off of all this stuff.
That's a thumb pad push enter.
Yes, so push this in, rotate it 90 degrees, and it will come out. The non-captive recoil spring. That has to come out now.
So now that's flopping around.
Yep. Now what we have to do is line up the bolt carrier, which is also the op rod, with this hole in the side of the receiver. There's a pin that connects basically the tail of the bolt assembly to the gas piston / op rod. We have to push the pin out the side of the receiver, so we have to line it up there, and then we also have a hole in the charging handle. So we line that up, and then
This is all really straightforward.
poke that through, and then that pin comes out, also not captive. Put that aside. Now we can pull the gas piston back and pull the... Can take the handguard off. Now we have a hammer in this. This is an open bolt firing gun, but it does have a free-floating firing pin that gets hit by a hammer. But the thing is, the hammer gets in the way of taking the op rod out the front, so we have to take the hammer out while it's still in the gun. This doesn't look like the hammer that you guys are thinking it's going to look like.
Can I just point out, we're just trying to get to the bolt.
Yep, there's the hammer. So that has to come out.
Won't lose that.
Now we can fold that down and take out the op rod. Now,
Still have a gun at the bolt.
yes, now the bolt there's like a couple of toggly parts of the bolt in here. And now we get to the trickiest part, which is this little bar on the side is held in place by a wire spring. And basically what it is the bottom rail that the bolt runs on. So there has to be a rail so the bolt doesn't fall out of alignment while the gun's cycling. However, because the back end of this receiver doesn't open up, you have to pull the bolt straight out the bottom of the gun, which means that receiver rail section has to be spring-loaded so that you can push it out of the receiver to pull the bolt out. Now, on later versions of the gun, they would put a little divot, a little notch in here, so you could use the rim of a cartridge case and just pop it nicely open. World War I, the 1918 pattern, they had not yet put that in. And so now I'm going to make Othais deal with that, because when we were practicing this, he's the one who made it look easy.
I don't know about easy. So the game here is to push the bolt all the way forward, and then get your thumb in there, push the little, I don't know what to call this, sliding section of rail. You want to push it out, and then you got to get the rim of the cartridge under it, because you can get the rim of the cartridge in there. They left a lip, but only if you first stick your thumb, put the bolt forward, stick your thumb in there, push it out, right?
All right.
I've hooked it.
I think
so
you
now,
may have it.
Hold on. Yeah, don't go back yet.
I'm not going back yet.
You
I
have to
wouldn't
put the
think of
toggle
it.
forward before you go back.
Right.
Because if you go back with the toggle, it
Then-
snags up in the rear end of the thing.
And it's all oily and slippery, and so you are going to lose your
So
grip on
grab the toggle, keep it forward as you push the bolt to the rear, lift up, give a little pry.
it. Oh, there we go.
Hey, so I managed to hit the secret of this one, but good lord.
And then there's your firing pin, also not captive.
Not anymore.
We won't lose that either.
So now we have the bolt and every other component of this gun, literally. By the way, the charging handle is retained by this pin, which is what connects this to this through this.
So we already lost that while we
literally-
were trying to get this out.
Literally, this is detail stripped to get to the bolt.
Woof. Okay. Now we got to put it back together.
I would say John Browning was an absolute genius, but that doesn't mean that everything he did was perfect.
Honestly, if you want to know the genius of this, he didn't draw this. This was in his brain to link. I don't even...
Man ain't right.
No. Although, to be fair, he had the open top before, so there may have been a
That's-
disassembly procedure there that we're not seeing on this one.
True.
So,
And if we look into the future of this design, they would redesign it so that the back of the receiver pivoted open and all the guts just came straight out the back. That's the FN Model D.
we covered this in such detail. Did you want to just go ahead and do a speed run to put this back together?
No, I just kind of want to shove it off the
it.
table and pretend it never happened. Okay, now actually, the one thing, we'll high speed the footage putting this back together so you don't have to sit through it all. But the one nice thing is, as much of a pain in the butt as it is to take this out, it's beveled on the bottom, so you can just drop the bolt, bloop, back in. That helps.
Don't forget the firing pin.
Yeah. Yeah, God help you if you put the bolt in and put everything else back in and they go, oh, what was this? Does it need that? Yeah, oh, it needs that to work. Yeah.
Where do we go from here, boys? Where do we go from here? Slip a pill to Kaiser Bill and make him shed a tear. And when we see the enemy, we shoot them in the rear. Oh joy, oh boy, where do we go from here?
There we go.
That wasn't as bad as I thought for reassembly.
No.
It's a lot.
It goes together more easily than it comes apart.
This is, I think, we don't see a lot of that. Not with these.
No.
I mean, so far it's been get it apart easy, throw it back together hard, but
That doesn't change it
This
being
is
a
the first
1.
one.
yeah, no.
No, it's still a 1, yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It's difficult in the sense that you run around with a live cartridge trying to fish things in and out of it. Like, this is a tool that you have to have, and granted, you'll have this tool. It's a good idea, but
This is a
it's
nightmare.
not a great idea.
This is a nightmare of disassembly compared to literally everything else that we have in this test.
Oh, yeah.
And in fairness to John Browning, this thing was developed on the fly during World War II, or during World War I, and it is a marvelous firearm from a functioning perspective. Like, there's a lot that this gun did that was fantastic.
I feel like if there had been a trials period, pre-war trials period, a lot of this would have been shaken out. They would have been like, we can't do it this way.
Remember, by the 20s, Colt commercially and FN commercially and militarily had iterated this design and fixed a lot of this stuff. But it was a question of, we want to get this thing into service as quickly as we can. There's a war on. We need this thing, which is the same as what we saw with the Chauchat. We need this now, and we need 250,000 of them. What can you make us?
In terms of assembly, much more difficult, but in terms of utility for the Chauchat and, let's get to war, this is a very comfortable gun to work with.
Everything is trade-offs. If you want, you can't have the gun cheap, fast, and perfect. Like, pick 2. You can have it fast and perfect and expensive. You can have it cheap and fast, but not perfect.
May, could you do this in the dark?
No, I couldn't even. I think I could do it in light now, but that would still. I'm pretty sure I'd get to the bolt part and be like, all right, I'm going to fish this out of here. And I'm sure it would take me a bit to get even just that part out.
You know what? The bolt's not that dirty. We don't need to clean the bolt. Just put it back together. Just drop some oil in it.
Yeah, hose it.
I'm just
blow it
going to
out.
drop some oil and shake it and just be on the way.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think we're up for another gun and another person.
All right, guys, welcome back again. We're here to disassemble the 0815, and he's going to play looky-loo behind it, of course.
I'm here too.
Yeah, Othais, Ian, they're both here, and I'm here just, mostly focused on the gun and getting it apart. Now, guys, I'm going to just go ahead and preface this, I'm just going to say this is really difficult to get apart, okay? This is going to take some time. We're going to want to open the top, which there's a really difficult push tab here. It actually does require a significant amount of force to push that forward. If you guys wouldn't mind assisting me. And
yeah, because if we don't lift this up, I should point out, that thing will fall down right on your knuckles.
It's just going to keep falling on your hands. So it's nice to have help.
That's why we have that center point balance, right? So we can tip it forward.
Exactly. And we're going to want to push the bolt handle forward, and then you actually just want to grab the bolt's face. You're going to want to lift it up and let the bolt handle come back slowly. All right, follow me so far. This is getting complicated. Going to want to twist, just rotate it and wiggle, and that's our bolt. Ladies and gentlemen, this is already apart.
Or technically a lock.
Well, it's a lock, but I mean...
It gets confusing to me because it doesn't do the lock-in. It's a weird...
The Maxim kind of has a whole glossary of its own. It's got
Yeah.
toggles,
That's
it's got
true.
locks, it's
The
got
actual
fusee
joint, which
springs.
is the lock, is never called the lock.
Yeah.
The breech face or breech mechanism is called the lock. It's confusing.
But we've already got it apart. This is the only piece that we have to take out. Everything else is retained on this gun.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can do this while we're
mean,
here.
we can
just
take out
lift that
the
guy
feedback,
out,
yeah.
but we don't even need to because that's not what we're going for. We
No.
just wanted the bolt, or in this case, the breech. But that's-
Maxim was developing this gun in the 1880s. And unlike a lot of our World War I guns, This thing was a completely matured system by the time World War I broke out. Kind of like the Mauser went through so many different iterations and upgrades, so did the Maxim. And by the time the German army had adopted the model of 1908 Maxim, the heavy, it's not quite the perfect Maxim. It's not.
Oh, that's the wild thing. This is not the most efficient lock.
No.
Like, this is the second best.
But what he did was he got things like the disassembly procedure down and then went on to making the internals of the gun more efficient.
I heard they actually had to take him off the factory floor because when the British were adopting, he kept going, but we could do that better. But we could do that. And we need to sell some of these to make money. Stop it.
Yeah, I can totally picture that.
Yeah, some guys focusing on like some hardcore details. Yeah, I can't imagine, people like that.
All right, so
Stop the video. We have to publish it sometime.
Yeah. Reassembly?
Technically slightly more difficult. You just need to make sure that when you are putting this back in that you just got it at the right angle. And you want to make sure you twist it in.
Since people can't see in there, it's worth pointing out that it's not threaded. It's just like an interrupted set of locking lugs. So you can put it in any orientation and
as
it
long
can
as
only
it just lines
assemble
up.
in the right orientation.
Oh yeah, and you just want to push the handle forward, and she's reassembled. Although you're gonna want to make sure that you just get her locked.
Boy, that was tricky.
I know, it was difficult. Sorry guys, that took forever.
Yeah, this is probably the worst one, right?
It's funny that the gun that takes by far the most, probably the most machine time to actually make, the most expensive of the guns, is also, without a doubt, the easiest to actually strip and reassemble.
Do you think these are actually the most complicated in the machine? I feel like it's the most metal.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm thinking of some.
Because a lot of this is sort of soldered together.
Maybe I'm thinking some of the early Maxims.
That's true.
How about that?
That's
From
true.
an engineering perspective, this is like one of the neatest, coolest, most mechanically, most steampunky.
There's the car that you want to say you own, and then there's the car you want to drive to work. And
This is the one I want to say I own.
To be fair, though, it's really easy to get in and out of these things.
Yes.
It's easy to swap the locks. They came with multiple locks.
The barrels aren't actually difficult to swap either. We don't need to go into that process.
No, but very easy. I mean, pop a pin, drop it, and go. Yeah. I mean, although that buttstock on this particular model makes it a little more difficult than, say, the big Maxim, but I feel like I'm back here, guys.
Yeah, he's hiding. All right, there we go.
So
I call this a 5.
Oh yeah, I'd
to
rank
me,
it 5.
This is our one definitive 5.
Yeah, the MG815 is winning. It's winning the entire comp.
No, it's winning this.
So far, who knows where it's going to end up at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think we have done all the stripping that we needed to do today, gentlemen. Why don't we actually get into the stats? How did these guns do? What came out, I guess, let's start at the bottom. What came out the worst?
Ooh.
The nicest, most famous, most adored gun of the whole test. And I mean that entirely literally, the BAR.
It may be just that there's a consequence to fitting. I mean, think about, Browning is the Escher. Well, I shouldn't say that. I sometimes think Pedersen is the Escher of the gun world, but Browning does a very good job of condensing technology. Yeah. But the problem in this case is when you condense all that technology and you do it in a pressure cooker of an environment that is World War I, you end up with something like the BAR.
Something's got to give.
Yeah, and it looks like we basically stacked the whole gun without any release for the bolt at the top. And therefore, we're going to have to take the whole gun apart to get to the bolt. Right. So any one step of that process, if it had resulted in the bolt, wouldn't be all that different from anything else we saw, except for the fact that it's the only gun that required sort of a tool.
Yeah, required a cartridge to get apart. That freaking little bolt release, that rail stub is just really annoying.
I was the only one of the three of us that could get used to it.
Yeah, I made you do it, in fact.
And by the way, if anybody's curious, it's just, if you reach in, you push out, you hook it with the rim, and then once you're there, that becomes a fulcrum. So what you do is when you go to reach for the bolt, you crank, and then you lift out. But it's still, I cannot describe to you how slippery it is. You need a very, very, very steady hand to not accidentally roll your fulcrum right out of the clip, and then you start over again.
Yeah. And this would be improved after World War I.
Right.
And I guess it's fortunate that the BAR was an exceptionally well-made, well-regarded gun, and maybe you didn't have to take it apart all that much, because you certainly wouldn't want to.
Hopefully not in the field. There were a lot of little parts that I could see
That's
easily
true.
getting lost.
The most non-captive parts, just everything
just
everywhere.
Everything was uncaptive. It's like, all right, what all could I lose here?
It's interesting to me to look at these and think about which ones existed before World War I as compared to which ones were developed during the war. Because one of the things I think we see is as a design matures, a lot of these things improve.
Yes.
And you'd see that with the BAR. After World War I, like they redesign it so you can pull all the guts out the back.
They arguably spent more time than they should have improving the BAR.
They wanted it to be better than what it was.
Yeah.
That was one of you two being like, I'm going to make this work.
And our best gun is the one that is the oldest and most mature by the time World War I happens, and that's the Maxim.
Yep.
One of the things that Hiram Maxim realized was if I'm going to get this adopted by militaries, all the militaries, because that's who he wanted as clients, everybody, it has to not only work, it has to be very easy to strip and reassemble.
Yeah, they should be able to throw any man, any team on that for them to be able to get that thing apart. And dang, if it isn't quick and easy to get apart.
Yeah.
Not only that, but it's also an assembly thing because the way the Maxim was supposed to be exported, it's like, well, if we want to change the caliber, we throw in a different barrel, we throw in a different lock, and we throw in a different feed block. And those are all things that come out like that in that gun.
That's impossible. The idea of modular firearms has only come around in the last 20 years, I'm sure. We then, as usual, we have one at the bottom, one clearly at the top, and then we have a bunch in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Lewis wasn't too bad. That one was kind of high up there on the list.
I think the Lewis was the best of the middle ground guns.
Yes, It really was.
And there wasn't much holding it back.
No, honestly, you could maybe lose the little cocking handle.
And the clock spring unwinding.
Yes.
Yes.
That was the huge setback for it. And I've had that happen to me where I got the tension just right. And then you're just getting a little too hurried. You don't rest your hand on it. You pull this. If it drops and that toe is the toe you don't want to hit, and it's the first thing that hits the ground.
And then you hear the sad sound of a buzzsaw that you're like, oh, all right.
But by the way, that process of releasing that thing is exactly how I nicked myself. We went to adjust it, I tripped it before I meant to, and the corners of the spring just nipped off part of my thumb. So.
Yeah, you used to like skin on your thumb.
Yeah.
And then we had some others that were kind of middle ground. The Chauchat, kind of like the BAR, shows this example of we're in a very compressed development cycle. We need the gun now for this war right now, or maybe there won't be a country to use it with. Something's got to give. We'll make it reliable first. We'll make it cheap and easy to produce second. And if figuring out how to make it easy and very efficient to reassemble, that one kind of gets thrown out the back. We'll deal with that later.
Yeah, the interesting thing that I've learned about the Chauchat on this is something that came up for some malfunctions that we're going to see throughout this. Here and there it's turning up in the video. But assembly is where we have to talk about it. So the thing is, when you think of the locking surface of a gun, you think of the locking lugs. Mm-hmm. What we found out today is that rear pin on the Chauchat bears all the recoil weight that comes back through the stock almost. I mean, not really, some of it goes through the stock, but way more than you think is being borne on one pin, and they tend to, over time, get a little oblong. Now, that's not necessarily disassembly, but it's just something that came up in disassembly, where it's okay, that's really cool, because it's you mentioned the spring-loaded captive rear, and it's very good for getting the gun apart quickly, but because it's there and round and fairly narrow in diameter, it starts to take such a beating that it gets elliptical. And that's a potential problem.
There is an important, the distance, the fit between the upper tube and the lower assembly is critical because that's where your sear engagement is.
Yes.
So if it's off, you're not going to be shooting that day.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a whole lot else to go on. The Hotchkiss looks like it ought to be terrible, but it's actually not that bad.
No, my only problem with the Hotchkiss is fishing the parts out of the Hotchkiss.
Yeah, you're just reaching into some dark recesses to get that stuff out.
It's almost easier to disassemble it than to reload it. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, that's one little part to lose, but I don't know that we need to even break down any of these any further, though. Yeah. It's just, in general, when you're talking about field stripping a gun, yes, it needs to be simple. And more importantly than even that, I think the number of non-captive parts should be 0. Really keep it down, because it's so stupid to lose a functional machine gun in the battlefield over a screw,
a pin, or screw, or
a
cocking handle. What do you do with your Lewis gun if the cocking handle goes bloop into the mud and it's gone?
You get a stick.
The gun's perfect, but you can't charge it. You can't shoot it.
Oh, well, we managed to get them all back together, so I guess we should probably go back to firing them, right?
Yes, definitely.
Sure, sounds good to me.
Thanks again for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. of the series. Don't forget that if you want to cheat the line, not wait around like a sucker, you can go over to C&Rsenal.com and download, for a nominal fee, the entire contiguous documentary as a single film. All the proceeds from that go towards supporting this endeavor, paying for all of our expenses for doing this, and making sure that it's possible for us to do it again next year on another cool subject. Also, of course, if you enjoyed this, make sure to tell Brownells, thank them for their participation and sponsorship, and check out their catalog. They have all sorts of materials that you'll find useful for modern guns, as well as all of your historical and antique firearms. There's some really great folks over there, and we're very happy to have their support. Now, our next episode is coming next week. That'll be on Forgotten Weapons, and it will be looking at reload times for all of these light machine guns.